since the end of World War I and the guiding force of its independence. In war, he was the only modern commander to lead Poland to victory. Pilsudski never lost his vision of a Poland in which minorities were welcomed. At his death, he failed to leave his nation with an effective democratic system. Too often, he had taken power in his own hands. Still, Pilsudski had been a man of broad political vision, a man of instinct, a man of action. He had been the jealous guardian of Poland's unity and independence for more than a decade. His body was taken to Krakow to be buried with the kings of Old Poland in Wawel Castle. His heart was taken east to his beloved Wilno. As Pilsudski's funeral train made its way through the countryside, many wondered whether Poland's future leaders would be able to control their turbulent society. Pilsudski's death left a power vacuum that was filled in 1936 when his mantle was bestowed on a political non-entity. Edward Rydz-Śmigły, a soldier of peasant origin, was Pilsudski's choice for commander-in-chief of the army. Pilsudski had hoped that this modest soldier would keep the army out of politics, but Rydz-Śmigły willingly became head of the government. The problems he now confronted were beyond his experience. At a rally in southern Poland, the new leader faced the victims of an economic depression. The countryside was grossly overpopulated. Millions were unemployed. The Catholic Church and its traditional practices were still the foundations of village life, but a growing number of peasants were becoming politicized. Most were trapped in poverty, bound to a way of life that had changed little over the centuries.
There were not many of us, only 13, and our parents. There was no question of any shoes. We went to school barefoot when it was like today. And when winter came, anyone who had to go outside, and there were 6 of us at home, had to use the same pair of shoes. My father was forced to send me out. After all, there were younger children at home, and I could fend for myself. I can't remember if I was 7 years old or not, but I couldn't have been 8 because at 8 you went to school. I hadn't started school, but I worked as a herdsman.
In such conditions, it was not surprising that the Peasant Party should become the leading force in radical politics. In 1937, its supporters staged a confrontation with the government. They stopped the delivery of fresh food to the city markets. There was strong support for the strike in southern Poland. Violence followed. 60 peasants were killed.
During the strike, the government used police and the army to pacificate the villages active in strike. They were about 6,000 of arrests. The people were beaten, and ran away into forest, hiding themselves in forest. The repressions were terrible.
Peasant militancy went back to the days of Tadeusz Kościuszko, a Polish hero of the American Revolution. He returned to Poland and in 1794 led a national uprising against the Russians. In the Battle of Roklavica, a charge of peasant infantry overwhelmed the enemy. Kościuszko would remain a symbol of Polish heroism, and the land where he was born would be contested for generations. Here in Kościuszko's homeland, far from the urban centers of Krakow and Warsaw, miles of sparsely populated territory trailed off to the east. The native people of these regions had not managed to set up states of their own. Throughout history, they had been dominated culturally and politically by the Russians or by the Poles. The question of who governed these boundless lands, who claimed the loyalty of these people, goes to the heart of the perennial dispute between Russia and Poland. To the native peoples of these regions, culture, language, history, and tradition were essential. By comparison, nationality was insignificant.
If you ask the question, who you are, the answer was Catholic or Orthodox. That's the only criterion. More important than any other. People didn't understand what it means, nationality.
In these territories, Poles, Ukrainians, Jews, Lithuanians, Tatars, Armenians, and Germans coexisted for centuries. After the First World War, they were once again part of a Polish state. From these regions had come some of Poland's greatest statesmen and military leaders, as well as some of its greatest authors. Polish culture drew much of its strength from these eastern territories. They were rich in history and local traditions that were exploited in literature and the early cinema.
A panny to masło, dziutki ten grot, jak to czekolada i miód. I gdybym się kiedy urodzić miał znów.
In this heartland of Polish Romanticism, Poles were in the minority. They were nobles and peasants among a population of mixed ethnic background. Not far away to the east was Russia.
There's a part of the Polish-Russian border that's even more mysterious than the forbidden country of Tibet. A barbed fence divides one country from the other, and up till now, it had never been photographed. But our cameraman was fired with ambition, and these pictures are the result.
Russia has always been felt as an external darkness. That external darkness used to devour people, deporting them to Siberia and so on. There is a completely different relationship between the Poles and the Russians than, for instance, between the Poles and the Germans. There is linguistic affinity. The Russian language somehow goes to the core of some Proto-Slavic roots. And there is a lot of ambiguity in the attitude towards Russians. There is a scorn, an attitude of scorn towards the barbarians, a feeling of superiority. at the same time a feeling of inferiority somehow because of there is a saying, Russian saying, which can be translated as trembling of the smaller who faces the bigger guy.
In 1937, Marshal Smigli decided he needed to enlarge his political base. He sought to create an organization which would include support from the center and the right. On his orders, a new political organization was set up known as Ozon. With its strident nationalism and hints of anti-Semitism, the Ozon Manifesto seemed to owe more to Dmowski's philosophy than to Pilsudski's. Smigli intended that Ozon should replace the old political parties and reach for a monopoly of power.
To było potrzebne dlatego, że tradycja legionowa.
It was necessary because after the death of Pilsudski, the legionary tradition started to lose its vitality.
Swoją żywotność.
And it was necessary to give this new movement an ideology which would be neither socialist nor center-left.
Dać ideologię, która by nie była socjalistyczna, ani centrolewa.
But an ideology which would serve the needs of Poland well.
Służyła ówczesnym potrzebom Polski.
Na terenie całej Polski staraniem obozu Zjednoczenia Narodowego zorganizowane zostały ośrodki wypoczynkowe dla robotników. Oto fragment...
Ostensibly, Ozon was a well-meaning, idealistic social group, running holiday camps and the like for the families of poor workers. Behind the facade, Ozon developed close contacts with an illegal fascist organization. But these links were soon broken. Fascism never became a real force in Poland. But in these final years of the 1930s, fascist groups were spreading elsewhere in Europe. This same Polish newsreel, which enthused about Ozon, included items from abroad. In Rome, Mussolini celebrated the 20th anniversary of Italian fascism with all the pomp he could muster. Fascism also triumphed in Spain. There, a bloody civil war brought victory to General Franco and defeat to a crusade that had united the entire European left. In Poland, Polish communists were seen as Soviet agents. But Stalin, in the course of his purges, accused the Polish communists of treachery. They were summoned to Moscow, jailed, and executed. Hundreds perished. The entire leadership was wiped out. In 1938, on the orders of Stalin, the party was dissolved.
I feel that what dominated then, as far as myself was concerned, was a feeling of despair, because on the one side was Hitler, on the other Stalin. And please make a choice.
Balancing foreign policy was the domain of Joseph Beck, the Polish foreign minister. Beck believed that the appeasement policies of Britain and France, combined with American isolationism, left Poland with no choice but to bluff and behave like a great power. Meanwhile, Hermann Göring continued his courtship of Poland. The Nazis intended to conquer Russia, and Hitler was eager for Poland's support. The war of nerves was turning serious. In the spring of 1938, the Germans annexed Austria. Poland exploited the ensuing tension to settle an old score. Neighboring Lithuania had been hostile to Poland, refusing diplomatic contact and upholding its claim to the Polish province of Wilno. The Poles threatened to march in unless friendly relations were established. Lithuania yielded. In Wilno, Smigli was hailed as a hero. Poland had acted like a great power, but its strength was an illusion. Its army was no match for Germany or Russia. and the coming years would make its momentary triumph insignificant. Poland in the waning days of 1938 was calm, its people unaware that intricate diplomacy would soon give way to war. Today is a time to speak of love, says the song, not a time for rational thoughts. Munich, September 1938. Britain and France came to appease Hitler. Eager to avoid a European war, they permitted Germany to annex Sudetenland, a region of Czechoslovakia. The map of Europe negotiated by the Allies in the wake of World War I was about to be torn apart. Poland took advantage of the situation to embark upon an expedition of its own. Polish troops marched into Czech Silesia and gained control of the region. The annexation was hailed as another triumph for Poland, but the stigma of sharing the spoils of Hitler's diplomacy left its mark. In reality, Poland was playing a dangerous game in the shadow of growing German might. Soon, Poland's leaders would have to confront the limitations of their power. In January 1939, Hitler summoned Joseph Beck to Germany. Hitler demanded a road and a rail link through the Polish corridor, and he wanted the city of Danzig.
Beck remembered that in 1934, before signing the Treaty of Non-Aggression with Germany, Pilsudski said, Danzig is the symbol. It's an axiom. If the Germans attack Danzig, this is the end. This is the war.
January 1939. Von Ribbentrop, the German foreign minister, visited Warsaw. He proposed a bargain. In exchange for Danzig, Germany would join Poland in an armed crusade against the Soviet Union. The Polish leaders declined. For now, at least, the balance of power would be preserved. Poland was reaching the end of its second decade as an independent state. Despite the possibility of war, the mood was optimistic. Economically, the nation was recovering. New industrial projects were coming into their own. Slowly, the Great Depression was receding. At Gdynia on the Baltic coast, an impressive seaport was constructed. Only 10 years earlier, this was a quiet fishing village. Now it was the pride of Poland's economic planners. There was also a political motive for developing Gdynia, to end the country's dependence on the neighboring port of Danzig, where the tension between Poles and Germans was increasing.
Man hätte ohne weiteres zusammenleben können, wie man jahrhundertelang zusammengelebt hat.
We could have lived together without any problems, as we had done for centuries, and I think to the advantage of both sides. That was destroyed in the first instance by nationalist policy, because of the Germans. But there was Polish chauvinism too, so the chauvinists amongst themselves, no matter how much opposition they showed to each other in the streets, I mean they beat each other up, they were nevertheless equal in their fanaticism.
On the 15th of March, 1939, the Germans seized what remained of Czechoslovakia. Now, Hitler's army stood on Poland's northern, southern, and western frontiers. The surrender of Czechoslovakia started diplomatic shockwaves. Joseph Beck hastened to London, where the British government had guaranteed the independence and integrity of Poland. The French also reluctantly endorsed the British guarantee.
Most of us, I mean, in the Foreign Office, felt that after Czechoslovakia, Danzig was the next item on Hitler's menu, as indeed it logically should have been, because after all, if he'd been determined to rescue his Sudetens from the Czechs, why shouldn't he want to rescue what he regarded as his Danzig from the Poles?
Kriegsfrauen, wo mögen sie noch so herausfordernd sein, schrecken uns keineswegs und werden in Danzig keinerlei Anzeichen von Angst hervorrufen.
In Danzig, the Nazi Party had virtually taken over the government.
There was a phrase in France at the time, I think it was Marcel Déat, then a socialist leader, why die for Danzig? Pourquoi mourir pour Danzig? And this was very much the mood in France. They were not at all keen to get involved.
In April, Hitler renounced his non-aggression statement with Poland. In May, Beck spoke to the Polish parliament.
Peace is a valuable and desirable thing. But peace, like almost everything in this world, has a price. A high one, but calculable. We in Poland do not understand the notion of peace at any price. There is only one thing in the life of peoples, nations, and states that is beyond any price. That thing is honor.
Despite a government run by soldiers, Poland's army was antiquated and inefficient. Feverish efforts were now made to modernize it.
Ten naród godny jest niepodległości, który umie o nią walczyć i za nią krew przelewać.
Polska więcej nie mogła zrobić.
Poland could do no more than it did to prepare its army. It couldn't get tanks, not only because we had no money, but because there wasn't anywhere to buy them. They weren't being made. And what was produced was being snapped up by the English and the French.
Anglicy i Francuzi.
In a last-ditch effort to draw Russia into an alliance against Germany, Britain and France sent a mission to Moscow.
One of the most important members of the British section was Admiral Sir R. Plunkett Ernley, Earl Drax. We wish them all bon voyage and a satisfactory conclusion to their discussions with the Soviet government.
The Russians naturally said, well, okay, you want us to be prepared to give military assistance to Poland in the event of a German attack. Well, okay, but we can't just wait on our frontiers until Poland has been overrun and then we are being attacked. The only sensible thing in that case is for us to have a military agreement with Poland in which we can send our troops, if necessary, into Poland and set up an effective defense, which, of course, in the case of any normal alliance, made perfectly good sense. But given past history, and fairly recent, after all, in the case of the Polish-Soviet War of 1919-1920, this was the very last thing the Poles wanted to accept, having Russian forces on their territory.
Berlin, late August 1939. Foreign Minister von Ribbentrop was leaving for Moscow. Secret negotiations between Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia were about to reach a startling climax. The two countries signed a non-aggression treaty on August 23rd. The treaty contained a secret protocol anticipating the partition of Poland between Germany and the Soviet Union. Further diplomatic efforts were irrelevant. peace was running out. Soon, Polish independence would be only a memory. Polish statehood lasted only 21 years, a single generation. In that time, the nation struggled to recover from the ruin of the First World War, struggled with the problems of assuming nationhood in troubled times. The interval was brief, but Poles would never forget it. September 1939. Germany and then the Soviet Union invaded. Soon, the world was at war. For 20 years, from 1919 to 1939, Poland had been independent. Against great odds, the Poles had held their state together. They had built a system of public education where none had existed and had cut their illiteracy rate in half. They had created a body of national jurisprudence and had laid the foundations of a modern industrial state. Whatever its problems, Poland was still making progress when in 1939, Germany and Russia invaded. What lay ahead was a nightmare of undreamt horror. Hitler's goal was not merely to conquer Poland, he wanted its complete destruction. Everyone in Poland would suffer, but Hitler had selected one group for special treatment, the Jews.